Number 5. The story of Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Mitchell is a storied man. He's part of an incredibly exclusive club out of 12 other people who can claim that they have seen the Earth standing on the surface of the moon. I assume they all have a group chat together. He's best known for typing 80 lines of code to save the Apollo 14 mission as it descended to the moon in 1971. He was the 6th man to ever walk on the moon, and he is a devout believer in aliens being out there. He insists that he knows that top government and military officials were hiding the truth behind aliens in New Mexico. He said it was a known secret that alien spacecraft were responsible for disabling nuclear missiles and shooting them down, supposing that aliens are directly involved in intervention to prevent us from destroying the planet. Which, if that's the case, I've got nothing but thanks to give for our extraterrestrial friends. Thanks for that. We're not that responsible. He goes on to insist that the Roswell incident was real, and the government had covered it up and buried it as a conspiracy theory to deter people from finding out the real truth, which he believes NASA thinks the public simply wouldn't be able to handle. In 2004, he told a Floridan newspaper that he knew of a secret cabal inside the American government that was responsible for studying alien bodies, and that after JFK, this group no longer answered to the president and didn't include the commander-in-chief in their briefings. Mr. Mitchell is quoted as saying, "They all know that UFOs are real. The question is, where are they coming from?" Now, NASA didn't quite have the same tune. NASA themselves obviously denied all of Mitchell's statements, saying that Edgar Mitchell is a great American, but we don't share his opinions on this issue. Well, of course. If you've been sitting on a secret for 60 years, you're not gonna fold over one guy, but a bunch of evidence? Well, maybe. My goblins, you know what time it is. If you've been digging the scares, stick around and subscribe for some scary stuff every single day. Okay, let's creep on. Number 4. Luis Elizondo. Luis Elizondo is one of the most outspoken believers in aliens and UAPs out there today, alongside Tom DeLonge, championing that he believes firmly that NASA and the Pentagon aren't telling us all the whole truth. And he would know, as Elizondo formerly led a research team to research potential UFOs. Although the project was disbanded, Elizondo never gave up his mission, believing it to be his personal calling to expose the truth. He's been quoted many times saying, "My personal belief is there's very compelling evidence we are not alone." He served on the Department of Defense and resigned in 2012 over excessive secrecy surrounding the UAP program. These aircraft, we'll call them aircraft, are displaying characteristics that are not currently within the US inventory, nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of, Elizondo said of the objects they researched in his time there. He added that the program was founded to analyze unexplained aerial phenomena and ascertain whether or not that what they were seeing is a threat to national security or not. Kind of unnervingly, when asked about that, he said, "We found a lot. We identified anomalous aircraft that are seemingly defying the laws of aerodynamics." Which, oh hey, coming from the mouth of someone who worked at the Pentagon, that seems just a little bit suspicious, right? Right? Not just me? The quote continues, "Things that don't have any obvious flight surfaces, any obvious forms of propulsion, and maneuvering in ways that include extreme maneuverability beyond, I would submit, the healthy G-forces of a human or anything biological." Elizondo's gone so far in the past as to suggest that he thinks the US government has fragments of UFOs or UAPs somewhere, reverse engineering it to learn all their secrets. Sounds extremely like someone higher up didn't want people finding out about whatever Elizondo was getting onto. And why not? Number 3. The signal. Now, when it comes to aliens, we all kind of assume in the back of our heads that our first direct contact with them is going to be very up close and personal. That they'll come down and hopefully we'll see them face to face or face to mandible, or perhaps we'll see their ships descending on us and it's already too late. But what if our first contact was something else? A radar signal, a noise through the silence of space. In 2003, astronomers working for the SETI, short for the Search for Extra Intelligence, a project dedicated to hunting for extraterrestrial life, were using a massive telescope to look to the stars. Now, nothing much came of it except for a series of unexplained radio signals from the skies. These signals all disappeared over time except one, which was growing stronger and stronger. The signal comes from somewhere between the constellation of Pisces and Aries, and curiously, the signal is at a frequency that absorbs and emits energy. Naturally, the researchers found this a bit interesting. Some of the astronomers believe that this could be a frequency that extraterrestrials are using to try and get our attention, like an intergalactic "you up" text. While it could very well have turned out to just be totally nothing or some sort of natural explanation that I'm not nearly smart enough to understand, I'm gonna err on the side of extraterrestrials. But we have to wonder what the signal was, right? I mean, we have to admit that's a bit suspicious, that there's something worth looking into there. Now, this story is from 2003 and I had trouble finding an update on it. But who knows? Whatever was broadcasting that could still be out there. Number 2, Blue Book. Now, I think we all kind of secretly suspect that some of our tax dollars are going to research aliens. I mean, what else are they doing all day? Well, in one form or another, government agencies have always been researching UFOs and UAPs. Since 1949 to 1969, Project Blue Book was the code name for a secret government research division dedicated to analyzing UAP technology, analyzing whether or not UAPs on record were threats to air and national securities, and just what any of this stuff in the sky was. It was basically the closest thing we had to a real-life X-Files department, as far as we know. I mean, there could be an even more secret one. Surely with all that government money, they must have found something special, right? Well, if you'd like to feel like Agent Mulder yourself, you can scroll through 130,000 pages of declassified documents from UFO specialist John Greenwald, who made it all available for free online. He's a defender of free information. Greenwald says secrets are not bad things. I think we should know about this and it should be in the history books. John, I completely agree. All this stuff about cover-ups, we can totally handle finding out aliens are real, okay? You know, we're big now, we're responsible, we learned about Santa, we can do this. A couple years ago, we experienced a wave where there were clowns hanging out on the street corner of like every rural street in North America. We got over that. We all saw Tiger King together. Aliens won't even be that weird, I don't think. Now, Project Blue Book was officially disbanded because according to a joint review, nothing significant ever came from it. Now, since then, it was thought that no government agency was looking into UAP research at all, except until the UAP document quietly dropped this year, you know, sneaking it under the door that NASA and the Air Force had been researching aliens and possible sightings this whole time under everybody's nose, and they leaked a bunch of documents and footage, and you should look it up after this video because I'm not joking, it's totally real. It seems just like us, NASA can't rest until they find the truth out there. Number 1, new developments. We are probably coming to one of the most exciting times in UAP history. As after the UAP report came out, there is probably more legitimacy towards the discussion around the serious existence of extraterrestrial life now more than ever. As of October 2022, NASA is pretty much coming clean and opening a new study into the research of UAP and extraterrestrial life. 16 hand-picked specialists have been selected to analyze former data and determine how to go forward observing future events. Now, the study is less focused on whether or not previous sightings are confirmed UAPs, since it's kind of hard to ascertain with missing data. So it's more focused on what observations will be needed to understand UAP sightings going forward. The team is going to include researchers and key personnel from all divisions, all walks of life, notably including former astronaut Scott Kelly, who formerly served as a pilot for the Space Shuttle Discovery, and also once held the world record for most days in space, so he probably knows a thing or two about objects floating in the stars. Now, Kelly himself doesn't personally believe aliens have been to Earth yet, saying, "I think there's life in the universe. Hopefully intelligent life, but I don't think they visit planet Earth." So there's some skeptics on the team, but hey, at least they're finally coming out to get to brass tacks on this thing. Officially, openly, the government is talking with us about studying this phenomena. This is amazing. Now, you know how scientists are. They gotta have some numbers on a paper before they'll believe it. An associate administrator at NASA, Thomas Zerbchin, said, "Data is the language of scientists and makes the unexplainable explainable. Exploring the unknown of space and the atmosphere is at the heart of who we are at NASA. This is maybe the most exciting time in history to be a UAP fan." Number 5, the Allagash Abduction. Our first tale is known as the Allagash Abduction. And by the way, what a turn of a phrase. That sounds like a great airplane book. Named after the Allagash Waterway in Maine, where it took place. In 1976, a group of 4 friends who'd all met in college were taking a trip camping, canoeing, and relaxing. The trip would be a trip they would never forget, and not just because of the salmon. The men, twin brothers Jack and Jim, and friends Chuck and Charlie, all decided to go out fishing on the lake at night. Before setting off though, they made sure to light a large campfire to act as a visible landmark from the water. Now the evening transpired fairly normally, fishing, sharing stories, until the men saw a blinding light in the sky above them. A glowing orb that shone brighter than any light any of the men had ever seen, flashing all sorts of bright, radiant colors. Now the object was hard to make out, but it looked to be about 80 meters in diameter, and was slowly approaching the fishing boat. The men hurriedly panicked and paddled back to the shoreline, only to discover that the campfire they had been lit had been completely smoldered and looked to have been put out hours and hours ago, despite the men having not been out nearly that long. Stranger still, a few days after the trip, the men all started reporting similar nightmares, seeing a silver operating room and long, tall, giant-headed creatures examining them in this room, taking samples of their blood, their skin, and so on. All of them described the room, the creatures, and the nightmares extremely similarly. The men underwent psychiatric evaluation and were all deemed mentally stable, even passing polygraph tests. So what happened? Could this have been a mass hallucination? Or were these men plucked by visitors from another world for study? And if you love UFO stories and alien abduction stories, we've got plenty more where that came from at Top 5 Scary. So toss a subscribe and keep on creeping on. Number 4, the mysterious man. Our next story comes to us from the internet's campfire, Reddit. A thread was posted asking abductees, or people who've got an abduction story to share their experience. Now the whole thing is really a highlight, but this one stood out for me. Take a listen, because this anonymous Redditor shared a truly unforgettable, strange experience. He was living in Washington at the time, and he and his friends were really big stargazers. One Thanksgiving, he got invited to stay with his friend's family. So they all went out to go do some stargazing, went out to a big field of knee-high grass, and were staring up at what they thought was a bunch of shooting stars. The original poster asked his friend what the light was, but he said he had no idea. The light was bobbing around, bouncing wildly in the sky like a pinball. Then all of a sudden, it fizzled out. Puzzled, but not disturbed, the friends continued on with their night, walking through the field, wondering what they'd seen, even joking that maybe it was a UFO, but assuming it must have been a drone or something. And then it gets weird. They came across a young man standing alone in the field. They were the only people there for miles around, and the poster said he would have been able to see him from where he was. So he said it was almost as if he appeared in front of them. He was wearing only ratty jeans and nothing else. It was the middle of November, so the attire was particularly odd. Now the friends were scared to approach him, but OP felt necessary to go forward. He said he didn't sound drunk, but that he did seem visibly stirred. He asked the strange man what had happened, and he said he did not want to talk about it, but he needed to be examined at a hospital immediately. The Redditor gave the man his jacket and saw him into an ambulance, where he was then taken off to a hospital. What happened? Was this man an abductee who'd been dropped off? Was the light they saw flooding around him being beamed down? We may never know. Number 3, the 1979 Spain sighting. Another Reddit thread asking a similar question asked users to share their stories of famous UFO and alien sightings from their country, bringing us this story from Spain that took place in November 1979. A plane took off from Mallorca, coming from Austria and heading to Tenerife. Not long after, it found red lights in the sky hovering ahead of it. Now initially the pilots assumed it was just another plane. The flight crew tried to signal over the radio to find out what was on their flight path. But neither the air traffic controller in Barcelona nor the military radar had any idea what it was they had encountered, as nothing else should have been sharing the airspace with them at this time. The plane ascended, hoping to avoid the flight path of the UFO, and to try and get a look to ascertain just what they were flying up with. The UFO kept getting closer and closer, so the pilots did an emergency landing in Valencia. The UFO had a similar idea and followed them around till it landed. The original plane's radar started to pick up 3 objects flying behind them. The military had sent out 2 planes to try and assess and contain the situation. They found a giant red light floating statically over the airport, even though it wasn't being picked up on by the radar. The light started to fly when they got closer as they attempted to chase it, soaring around, tailing the mysterious floating light for upwards of 2 hours, intermittently losing sight of the target completely, occasionally getting blips on the radar, until eventually the trail went cold, and as quickly as it had appeared, the strange light had disappeared. People on the ground reported seeing that light all over that day, and to date, no one truly knows what had happened. Number 2. The Travis Walton Incident. Now, our next story is a wild one even by top 5 standards, but that's exactly why I wanted to include it. Our story starts in November 1975, and I'm pretty sure that's the third one of these that took place in November. It's a weird month for aliens, huh? Travis Walton was working as a forester, and the day was passing normally. Walton and his co-workers from the logging crew were riding in a truck, 7 men total, when they encountered a flying saucer-like object hovering above them around 100 feet in the air, making a loud, high-pitched droning noise. The truck stopped, and Walton left the vehicle to get a closer look at the unidentified flying object. And suddenly, a bright light surrounded the truck and knocked Walton back and unconscious. Terrified, the other men drove off. Walton then goes on to claim that when he awoke, he was no longer in the forest on the ground, but was in a bright, silvery, hospital-like room being observed by 3 short, bald creatures. Very similar to the Allagash Abduction story. He says that he struggled as much as he could against his captors until he was met with a tall creature that closely resembled a human, but was wearing an intimidating helmet. The masked creature escorted Walton to another room and put a translucent mask over his face, and he blacked out. Walton says the next thing he can accurately remember is walking alongside a highway 5 days later. The thing is, Walton really was missing for 5 days. There was a search. Scent dogs and helicopters were used to track him over the woods, and he was assumed to have passed. For 5 full days, he was completely untraceable until one day he just reappeared. Since that fateful week in 1975, Travis has sworn that what happened to him was an abduction, even if it just seemed like a bad dream. His story served as the basis for the 90s horror film Fire Fell from the Sky, so if you're looking for a dramatization of this story, good one to check out. And number 1, the Rendlesham Incident. It's sometimes referred to as Great Britain's Roswell. The Rendlesham Incident is a very noticeable case in UFO sighting history. On December 26, 1980, there was a series of vivid, bright, flashing lights flying over Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England. 2 U.S. Army personnel, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston, were stationed at local Air Force bases and were alerted by these strange lights, worrying that it could have been a threat. The younger of the 2 men, Mr. Burroughs, said that the lights looked like a beacon flashing all sorts of colors. Over 40 personnel stationed at the Air Force base corroborated this claim. The 2 men got clearance to investigate whatever was flashing over Rendlesham Forest. In their official document to their superiors, the 2 men write that they saw a strange, glowing, metallic triangular object hanging in the sky, pulsing with colored lights. Neither of the men had any idea what it was they were witnessing. The craft seemed far more advanced than anything either of them had ever seen, and seemed not of this world. As if that wasn't compelling evidence enough, neighboring farm animals were all in a frenzy as this thing was flying, and the airmen's equipment started malfunctioning. The personnel could no longer use their radio to contact the base. Landing in the middle of the clearing in the forest was a craft unlike either of them had ever seen. It was black, triangular, and made out of smooth, opaque glass. No windows or landing gear. It didn't look like anything either of these trained servicemen had ever seen. Penniston describes there being hieroglyphic-like symbols etched onto the shell of the vessel, although they were far too cryptic for him to understand. The craft took off, changing the lives of those men together. And it wouldn't even be the last sighting of the Rendlesham UFO, because not even 2 days later, the same strange lights were seen flying overhead the forest again. This time, coming prepared, crews set out with Geiger counters to follow up on whatever was flying around them. The patrol found their way to the landing site Penniston and Burroughs had described and found several depressions in the ground, all setting off the Geiger counter for radioactivity. And lo and behold, above them was those same flashing lights that had been taunting them 2 nights before, disappearing into the skies. 40 years later, and we're still no closer to understanding what happened in the Rendlesham Incident. Number 5. The Camouflage Cloud. Alright, truth seekers, our first clip up to date comes to us from Instagram, and I know, but hear me out first before you discredit it and watch this clip and then tell me what you think. User the UFO God, and look, maybe it's just the name, but I'm inclined to trust them, posted this video recently, and it's been illuminating. In the video, we can see something in the clouds moving, or rather, the clouds themselves moving in a way that almost makes it seem alive. If anyone out there has seen Jordan Peele's Nope, that's the first thing that I thought to watching this clip, and mostly why I wanted to include it in this video. It brings up an interesting thing to consider. We tend to only think of UFO sightings as little black boxes zipping up through the sky, carrying passengers from another world, but what if the UFO sighting was the alien itself? You know what I mean? You follow along? An organic, non-humanoid entity capable of changing shape in ways that our little primitive human brains just couldn't comprehend? Look, I know I'm mostly summarizing the plot of Jordan Peele's brilliant Nope here, but it's an interesting thing to crunch on, and when you're watching this clip, it's hard to think of anything else. I mean, look at the way the cloud moves. It definitely doesn't look like any cloud I've ever seen. And what is there to suggest that extraterrestrial life will fit in neatly into our idea of what they should look like? I mean, we think of flying saucers just because that's what pop culture tells us, but it could be anything, really. There's also the possibility that whatever we're looking at is some incredibly advanced cloaking technology masking a craft. I mean, invisibility cloaking isn't as sci-fi as you think. Prototypes for cloaks are being developed by militaries around the world today. Let me know what you think of this footage down below in the comments, because it had me scratching my head and rubbing my chin, making all kinds of hms and ha's. And if you like what we're doing here and you want to see more UFO content and wild speculation, well, I have got some great news for you, my viewer. I've got loads of UFO videos and I've got tons of vague speculating from yours truly. All you gotta do is hit subscribe. Number 4, Area 51. Our next clip comes to us from Nevada, specifically near Groom Lake. If you're not super familiar with the geography of Nevada, and why would you be unless you're from there, if I told you that Area 51 is located right on top of Groom Lake, would that catch your attention a little bit? You know, the top secret government black site that technically doesn't exist. The infamous base said to be home to all manner of extraterrestrial activity. That's enough run up, I think. Let's check out the clip. Now, anything coming out of Area 51 is already pretty suspect. But this is really weird. In the video, we can see a series of flying lights hovering high above the desert dunes. Bright lights in the desert sky is one thing, but in the video we see what looks like them forming together. A series of lights merges together to become one larger one flying around. So what could it possibly be? Drones flying around? Voltron? Now drones seems like it would be the most likely answer if it was anywhere other than Area 51. I'm just saying. Whatever's happening here has to be a top secret. Could this be experiments with technology recovered from beyond the stars? Now there are countless conspiracies surrounding Area 51, but one of the most recurring and popular ones is that it's where UFO technology is stored and reverse engineered to develop new technology and systems for the US military. Perhaps even pilots could be trained to fly alien craft. Whatever's going on here, the likelihood of us ever finding out is next to impossible. If you've seen our video on Area 51 secrets, you know that they keep everything wrapped tight as a knot down there. Nothing they don't want you to see is making it out of that base. That won't stop us from trying to get a good look. Number 3, bizarre light patterns. Now our next sighting comes to us from the stars themselves, specifically during a live stream of the ISS, the International Space Station for the uninitiated. The stream is simple enough, a live stream view out of a porthole of the space station, offering a round-the-clock look at the stars. It's relaxing and fascinating, and I recommend you check it out. But it's also a window of opportunity into a world of unexplained phenomena. One astute viewer was watching the stream late at night when they saw something incredibly bizarre. Watch the footage, I think you'll know exactly what I mean. We can see a cluster of lights moving bizarrely across the screen in a pattern all in unison together. Now this camera is pointed downwards towards the Earth, so some commenters have suggested that possibly what we could be seeing is intense lights shining up from the Earth herself onto the night sky, and while the realist in me can see where they're coming from here, the paranormal investigator in me is fascinated by the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this is something a little bigger than a weird light pattern. Maybe someone in the comments who knows more about lights and stars can help me out with this, but to me, this cluster of lights moving seems like it's something, man, you know? Could this be another example of extraterrestrial cloaking technology? It's far from the first time astronauts have reported seeing strange things up and around the ISS. I have to imagine the International Space Station is probably a hotspot for extraterrestrial activity. I mean, aliens coming to Earth is one thing, that's on our territory, but our big station up in the stars, that's their neighborhood, that's their backyard we put that up in. I'm sure they want to come out and see what that's all about. I wonder if aliens see it as like a funny little tourist destination to check out. Take some photos with. Who knows? Number 2, Lieutenant Gorman's UFO dogfight. Now not much happens in North Dakota. Fargo is probably a lot more known as a Coen Brothers movie and a slept-on FX series than it is known as a town where anything of note happens. Unless of course you count the occasional UFO sighting. In October of 1948, Lieutenant George Gorman of the North Dakota National National Guard would make history and inspire theories for decades when he claims he got into a dogfight with an alien craft. He was flying above the town of Fargo, North Dakota, when he saw what looked like an aircraft about 500 feet below him. He radioed into air traffic to try and ascertain what it was he was looking at, and was shocked to hear back from Mission Control, who told him, well, there shouldn't be any other planes in that area. Naturally, Gorman flew in to investigate. He reported that it was a tiny object, some 6 to 8 inches in diameter, blinding white and completely round, blinking on and off. He says that as he approached this strange bright object, it charged towards him. He pursued it as best he could, but when it looked as if the object was going to crash into him, it shot upwards at a 90-degree angle. He attempted to pursue it, chasing it 14,000 feet into the air, only for it to disappear inexplicably at that mark. Later that night, the air traffic control tower reported seeing that exact same bizarre light at the airfield. Gorman touched down and told his superior officers that he had no idea what it was he encountered, but that he had reason to believe that whatever he was pursuing had thought behind its movements, that it seemed to be making decisions, conscientious choices, and it was reacting to what he was doing. Lieutenant Gorman would live out the rest of his days fairly normally, but no doubt in the back of his mind, he must have always wondered just what it was he encountered that fateful night. Number 1. Tic Tac sighting. If you're a UFO enthusiast, you probably already knew about this, but I'll never stop banging on about this because it's the craziest thing that's happened in years. The Pentagon publicly revealed that they've been tracking UFO development for years, putting some serious weight into the UFO discussion. Besides doing more to legitimize UFO discussion than anything else, like ever, it also provided us with a bevy of sightings from government agents to pull from. In 2004, a pair of Navy pilots tracked a series of UFOs for weeks on end. According to their reports, these objects would appear suddenly at about 80,000 feet in the air and then descend rapidly towards the Pacific Ocean, eventually stopping at around 20,000 feet and just hovering. They would either drop out of radar range or shoot right back up into the sky, which is pretty bizarre behavior. These entities were monitored for weeks before 2 fighter jet pilots were officially sent in to investigate the phenomena. Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slight, who flew out to try and get eyes on it. What they found would confound the veterans. The men reported back that the object resembled a giant Tic Tac, an unidentifiable white-colored oval-like aircraft about 40 feet long. Far, far too big to be a drone, and doesn't really sound like any aircraft I've ever heard of. The craft was jumping around erratically, staying just out of reach of radars, but not moving in any one particular direction. The pilots agreed on a rendezvous point to touch down and discuss whatever it was they had just seen, but as they were heading towards it, the UFO flew towards their rendezvous point at a breakneck speed before disappearing entirely. Commander David Fravor said it was unlike anything he had ever seen before, and the whole experience had weirded him out. Completely understandable. I think if I ever saw a giant Tic Tac spiraling erratically through the air, it would kind of affect me too. So what do you think? Any ideas at all? Because that sounds like pretty hard proof of a UFO.
Number 5. A sighting from Colorado. When flying over Colorado, one could expect to see tall mountains, vivid landscapes, beautiful, lush forests, and clear running rivers, all of which are things I miss while being trapped in this void. Something that you might not expect to see when looking out your airplane window is an unidentified flying object carrying visitors from another world. But just because something is unexpected doesn't mean it can't happen. As an airline pilot named Jeremy Corbell found out earlier this year. Earlier this year, Jeremy Corbell was flying over Colorado when he saw something he didn't expect. At first, it appeared to be a shooting star, but this theory was thrown out when it appeared to split into 3 pieces, which then went into a triangle formation. The veteran pilot was so shocked at this that he pulled out his phone and filmed the phenomena. While passing aircraft can often be mistaken for alien ships by people who don't know any better, the fact that this was reported by a pilot who would know if it was simply another plane is very interesting. Multiple theories were put forward, including that the lights were high-altitude reconnaissance drones, but the level of light given off by them disqualified this theory. The pilot described the lights as being unlike anything he had ever seen in his entire career of flying. Over the last few decades, many commercial pilots have apparently seen unusual craft sharing the skies with them, but have been prevented from reporting the incidents by airline companies they work for. Are the airlines worried about their pilots seeming crazy? Or are they worried passengers others will be afraid of flying if they know they aren't the only ones up there. Number 4. A sighting from the Southeast United Kingdom. You would think that an entire country who have been obsessed with the tales of an extraterrestrial who travels through space and time in a blue police box while kidnapping their citizens to act as his acolytes for the last 60 years wouldn't be too shocked when confronted with evidence that aliens from other planets really exist. But it would seem that no matter how much fiction one consumes, it can still be shocking when confronted with the real thing, as a security guard in England found out in our next entry. When checking CCTV footage from your work, you may be expecting to see animals or even some light crime. But in July 2022, a man in the United Kingdom saw something far stranger. Visitors from another world. On the screen, he saw a large glowing sphere suddenly appear above a nearby power station complex. It hovered above the station and then just as suddenly disappeared. At first, the man thought it was a flare, but there was no trail showing where it could have been shot from. He continued to look for a rational explanation, checking flight radar to make sure it wasn't a plane or a drone. He went outside to see it with his own eyes, but nothing was visible to the naked eye. He brushed it off until a few days later when a coworker came in claiming to have seen the same light hovering and then disappearing over a nearby field. The workers went back through their CCTV footage and posted the footage online. What exactly did they see in the sky? And where did it go when it disappeared in the blink of an eye? These workers will likely never know and will instead carry these questions around in their heads until the day they die. Number 3. A sighting in Las Vegas, Nevada. Las Vegas is a city that would sound like a city in a science fiction novel if we didn't know for a fact it is real. A city where vice and debauchery are encouraged, with claims that no consequences will be remembered once you leave its borders. A flashy city of neon, constructed in the middle of a barren desert. Considering how ridiculous that sounds, and Nevada's already considerable reputation for alleged alien activity, perhaps we should not be surprised that visitors from another world would want to take a look for themselves. Proving that what happens in Vegas does not always stay in Vegas, we have our next entry. A man and his friend were driving home at night when they saw unusual activity in the sky. 2 large white orbs of light were floating in the sky. As if this were not shocking enough for the witnesses, smaller red orbs began to appear as if coming from the larger craft. These red lights would fly off on their own, sometimes returning to the larger white orbs. The witnesses claimed that over 25 of these red orbs came out of the craft and flew around, which begs the question: did they see an alien craft or something else? If it was an alien craft, what was the purpose of these smaller red lights? Were they searching for something? And if they were, did they find it? Was this something sinister or simply an interstellar game of hungry hippos? More importantly, why am I asking you? The glowing white orbs reportedly stayed in place for over 5 hours before eventually disappearing into the night. Number 2. A sighting in Sacramento. For those who are more skeptical, it is understandable that you would not be impressed by a lot of footage that is released of alleged alien encounters. It is often grainy, shaky footage that looks like it was filmed on a potato rather than a camera. And oftentimes, one is right to be skeptical. Oftentimes, things can be mistaken for alien crafts when seen through the lens of a phone camera late at night in the dark. But sometimes, people witness the unexplainable in broad daylight. Such is the case in our next entry from Sacramento, California. In this case, a man was in his yard with his family when he looked to the sky and saw a cone-shaped object flying through the sky. They pointed it out to their parents, who were also in the yard, and all of them did their best to capture footage of the cone-shaped craft. It seemed to morph in shape between a cone and an elliptical shape, but when they zoomed in, they saw that the bottom of the cone was emitting light. It is clearly not a plane, and the light coming out of the bottom is curious to say the least. Number 1. A sighting in Canton, Ohio. When working a full-time job, having the opportunity to relax on your day off with a cold drink in the company of your loved ones is something you look forward to all week. While imagining how you will spend your leisure time, you may imagine a variety of experiences, like land darts or barbecuing for your friends and neighbors. Rarely do people imagine that they will be spending their time off witnessing an interaction between the military and an unidentified flying object, as is the case in our next entry. On the 10th of November, a man was sitting on his back porch enjoying a well-earned day off when he heard the sound of a military helicopter. The helicopter appeared to be chasing after something. He looked around and saw several small, white glowing shapes moving at high speed away from the helicopter. He grabbed his phone to record what he was seeing, but several of the shapes disappeared before he could record. However, some of them remained, and he was able to capture them on film. While this is impressive footage, the most disturbing part of the story for me is the helicopter chasing them. Were they trying to research the UFO? Or were they attacking them or chasing them away? Whatever it was, let's hope that it didn't result in any tensions between humanity and an advanced alien race.
Number 5. Well, first and foremost, if you were looking for any proof that the government definitely knows more about aliens than they let on, how about from the mouth of the three-letter organizations themselves? The CIA released a tweet in 2014, wow, obviously was meant to be taken in a joking manner, but still pretty illuminating, saying that throughout the 50s and 60s, they estimate that 50% of all sightings of unexplained aerial phenomena and UFOs were simply the CIA testing new aircraft. Out of context, the CIA admits they were behind 50% of all UFO sightings is an extremely attention-grabbing headline, and probably what I should have named this video. Would have got you to click better. And it is an attention-grabbing headline. At the time they were testing the Lockheed U-2 spy plane, codenamed Dragon Lady, which was able to fly at altitudes thought unreachable by a one-manned aircraft at the time. We know the CIA will always be a little bit more technologically advanced than they're willing to let on. That's just the nature of shadowy governments. But the conspiracy theorist in me has to wonder, is it even just the littlest bit possible that them releasing this could be a misinformation campaign? I mean, this is just what they're willing to admit, right? Who's to say what they won't admit? What if they put stuff like this out there so the next time you see something odd in the sky, you just dismiss it thinking, oh, that's just the CIA testing airplanes, instead of the more logical, reasonable answer that it's an alien spacecraft observing you from up above? And what if all I'm saying is just wild speculating and tinfoil hat level conspiracies because I'm trying to get views on video? It's more likely than you think. But them admitting they're responsible for most UFO sightings intones to me that they're aware of a lot more UFO sightings that are reported. Makes you wonder how much they research them all. Do you think they look at every blurry cell phone camera video posted to Reddit, or just the really serious ones that make the news? I'm hoping to get some answers someday, and I have a feeling that some of those answers are in this video. It won't all be wild speculation, I promise. And hey, if you want to see more alien stuff, click through. We've got boxes full of declassified documents, NASA stories, and videos that are just out of this world. Get it? So stay subscribed and stay scared, and I'll see you there. Number 4, the Guy Hottel Memo. So it's a pretty much an open book secret that the three-letter agencies have known about aliens in some way or another since they've started writing things down. They don't hide it or pretend to hide it anymore, which is nice. They finally admitted that Area 51 even exists for the first time a couple years ago, so we could all use a little openness in our day-to-day. Let's take a look at one of the FBI's most talked about and most viewed documents, the Guy Hottel Memo. And despite being one of the most seen FBI memos, it's but a single-page document that was never followed up on. Well, it sounds like we should follow up on it. Guy Hottel was the head of the FBI field office in Washington, and his report was addressed to the head of the FBI, one J. Edgar Hoover. The contents of the report were simple, but shocking. It detailed the descriptive encounter of an agent making a physical sighting of what they believed to be a UFO. It's dated 3 years after the Roswell Incident, but it was reported in New Mexico for what it's worth. Here's a quote from the memo. The saucers were described as being circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. Now, if you ask me, that is almost too perfect, isn't it? I mean, the memo lines up nearly perfectly with the stereotypical, cartoon description of aliens being little gray or green men flying around in flying saucers around New Mexico. The memo goes on to read that the agent claims they had found the saucers because an FBI high-powered radar in the area had detected it, and this radar detecting it had interfered with the controlling mechanism of the crafts. But despite all of this, which really seems like it's the paper trail screaming, proving, hey, aliens are out there, you should go check them out, the memo ends by saying no further evaluation was attempted, and the Hottel memo was never followed up on, presumably crumpled up and thrown away. Director Hoover, I guess, thought it wasn't worth his time and disregarded it, leaving it now as nothing more than an incredibly odd piece of history. Number 3, Project Blue Book. Well, here's the thing. Even if Director Hoover at the FBI didn't see fit to look into the Hottel memo, there were definitely other organizations that were looking into UFOs. Maybe it's not just the FBI, but I can tell you that the Air Force sure was. If you're an experienced UFO enthusiast, perhaps you're already very familiar with Project Blue Book, but if you're not, hey, let's talk about it. The project was officially started in 1952 and terminated in 1969. And the project had 2 main goals. 1. Confirm if UFOs were a threat to national security. And 2. Scientifically analyze any UFO-related data. Well, that seems like pretty strong evidence to me. Not that the project existed to see if UFOs are real, but rather to determine if they were a threat. That seems like they're writing and admitting like, no, we know, we just want to know if they're scary. And is that not the most human sentiment you've ever heard? If you guys learned nothing from Avatar, we gotta be making friends with aliens, not being afraid of them. In the years of Project Blue Book's operations, a stunning 12,618 reports were filed and collected. And those are just the ones that are officially recorded. Of those, interestingly, there were an individual 700 reports that were found to be unexplainable after research and intense analysis. Isn't that interesting? Now, a great number of these reports turned out to be the U-2 spy plane that we mentioned all the way back in point number 5, if you remember that far away. But that still leaves 700 completely unexplained sightings of aircraft that the USAF looked into and could not find answers for. The project was ultimately shut down in 1969, with the official explanation being given that, number 1, no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever given any indication of threat to our national security. And number 2, there has been no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. And number 3, there has been no evidence indicating the sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. Oh, well that sounds like kind of a bit of a bummer, doesn't it? They went through thousands of documents and declared that none of it was worthwhile evidence to suggest that aliens exist. Well, it's a shame that we're never going to mention any more things of the Air Force on this video, or any more things about pilots encountering aliens. I mean, that really blows. I mean, except for our next point. Take a listen. Number 2, the UAP report. Very recently, the Pentagon declassified a series of documents known internally as the UAP report, and it was basically the sequel to Project Blue Book, the streaming follow-up. And yeah, every single time we have an alien video, I'm probably gonna have a little meltdown where I talk about how last year the government confirmed that they researched UFOs and that's what they spend your money on, and no one seemed to care about this, they just slipped it under the rug. I guess we were kind of busy with other stuff, but still, what happened to our curious minds, people? We learned that the various three-letter agencies in the States had been researching, analyzing, and scouting out sightings of UFOs, mostly because pilots just could not stop reporting them during training ops. One pilot, Lieutenant Ryan Graves, claims that he saw hundreds, maybe thousands in his career as a Navy pilot. One of the more famous ones is the Tic Tac sighting, referring to a massive oval-shaped aircraft that was spotted by 2 pilots. This one comes from 2004, and the 2 veteran pilots, Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate, were the ones who called it in. 2 respected, trustworthy Navy veterans. Their report reads that the objects were spotted almost out of nowhere, some 80,000 feet in the air, which would then descend rapidly towards the Pacific Ocean, then stop at around 2,000 feet and hover in place. Very normal airplane behavior. They would drop out of radar range or shoot directly up into the sky on a 90-degree angle. For weeks, Navy crew was watching these objects trying to determine just what they were. They certainly weren't American in origin, and they weren't recognized by any other organizations. To confirm what they'd seen, Slate and Fravor were sent off on a reconnaissance mission to get eyes on it. What they found was more confusing than either of the 2 men could ever have imagined. They reported back that the object they were seeing was like a giant Tic Tac, white-colored, oval-shaped, and 40 feet long. Far too big to be a drone, and it didn't maneuver in a way like an aircraft would, making erratic movements, staying out of reach of radars, as if it knew it was trying to stay undetected. The pilots flew towards a rendezvous point to touch down, and presumably cracked their windows open and asked each other, hey, what the hell was that? But as they flew towards the LZ, the UAP flew past them at a breakneck speed and then disappeared entirely. When questioned about it, Fravor said that it was unlike any aircraft he had ever seen in his life. I mean, that guy flew planes like every day for years, so he probably knows a thing or two. Number 1, non-terrestrial officers. Now, if you're like me, you're probably frustrated that you know the truth is so close within grasp behind closed doors. To know in your heart of hearts that there are answers to the unexplained just out of sight would drive you to do something crazy. Now, for most of us, all we can do is sit and speculate and maybe watch some lovely top 5 videos of a very handsome host talking about aliens. But for one Gary McKinnon, a Scottish computer programmer, he decided that wasn't enough and decided to take matters into his own hands. McKinnon was a genius computer hacker and had his sights set on the biggest prize he could imagine, going after NASA's servers to see if they had any hidden alien data just waiting to be found, in what was described as the biggest military hack of all time. Quite the conversation starter. Why would anyone risk their career, freedom, and livelihood on this? Well, Gary wanted the truth and he would do anything to get it. McKinnon claims he had insider knowledge that confirmed the US had suppressed anti-gravity technology reverse engineered from UFOs and free energy energy. In his own statement, McKinnon said, "This should not be kept hidden from the public when pensioners can't even pay their fuel bills." Yeah. Well, so what did McKinnon find? Well, he didn't find proof of the reverse-engineered UFOs that he'd been hoping for, but he found quite a lot that was remarkably illuminating. First up, a 400-page document called the Disclosure Project, outlining testimonials from government agents across multiple branches of service, reporting all their sightings and scientific analysis on unexplained flying objects. That would already be pretty impressive, but on top of that, McKinnon also managed to find a document entitled Non-Terrestrial Officers. Non-terrestrial officers? What? What? Is that just fancy talk for astronaut? Well, the document was a spreadsheet listing the names of NASA officers and employees who were to be transferred to new ships or to serve on board space stations. But here's where it gets weird. McKinnon noted that the names of these vessels listed did not appear to exist in any other database. And if that wasn't enough, McKinnon claims in his searching he saw images of aircraft that did not resemble anything he had ever seen. One in particular he describes as looking like a massive cigar-shaped craft floating over the northern hemisphere that did not look man-made. One wonders if that's the same as the Tic Tac ship. He said he was in a shock looking at the image and didn't think to take a photo. Now, after pulling off an unbelievable fast one on NASA, McKinnon couldn't resist a bit of cheeky cyber vandalism and edited NASA's website homepage with a bit of text that read, "Your security is crap, by the way." Now, I'm not endorsing hacking a government website, but that's one of the coolest things I've ever read. Now, I don't know how much you know about the United States government. Boy, do they just love it when you prove to them that they have a massive security breach in their most classified data. Presumably the only thing that kept McKinnon from being strapped to a car battery and thrown into a black van by the men in black was the fact that he lived in Scotland and was kind of hard to get a hold of. He was arrested by UK police, and the United States government tried their absolute hardest to have him extradited to the States to be tried for the fullest extent of his crimes. Honestly, I bet it was the note. I bet that's what really pushed them over the edge. McKinnon managed to avoid extradition and was protected by the Crown for serving out what would have been a 70-year sentence. But presumably he's not planning any road trips to the States anytime soon, and I'm sure NASA has improved their security just a little bit. Number 5. The Roswell Autopsy. Perhaps one of the most famous pieces of lost alien footage is the infamous Roswell Autopsy tape. Maybe you've heard of it. If you're a UFO enthusiast like me, no doubt it's come up before at some point. Roswell was kind of the birthplace of UFO mania, where a lot of the first conspiracy theories and a lot of the public ideas we have about aliens really stem from. If you don't know somehow, the story goes that an alien craft crash landed in Roswell, New Mexico, where it was swiftly apprehended by shadowy government agents looking to pull a curtain over the whole thing. Reverse engineered, studied, down to the pilot of the craft, recovered by FBI scientists. Almost immediately after, hushed whispers and rumors of a recorded alien autopsy set conspiracists and enthusiasts' mind ablaze in equal measures. Recorded footage of an alien body being dissected would be undeniable proof with world-shattering consequences, and would probably make for some pretty good ratings. Well, the Fox network would agree with you, because in 1995, the footage was broadcasted on Fox, presented by legendary thespian and #1 guy to trust in regards to human-alien relations, one Jonathan Frakes. The film broadcast was not the true footage of the autopsy, but rather a high-budget recreation to show for a wider public audience what had happened. The director claims he had seen the original footage from the 1947 autopsy, but couldn't release it. He claims that he spliced shots from the original footage into the faked footage to provide some clarity, but didn't tell us what was real and what wasn't. And he insists that the video wasn't faked, but rather a reconstruction for educational purposes. Now, despite only being a reenactment, the special effects of the footage are remarkable. It does look pretty believable. It was helmed by industry legend Stan Winston, the special effects warlock responsible for bringing the Predator and the aliens alike. The alien body in the footage was filled with sheep guts, chicken entrails, pig knuckles, and raspberry jam to create the illusion of an alien filled to bursting with foreign organs, and probably tasted halfway decent with a little bit of soy sauce. So was the footage ever actually real, or was it all just cooked up to sweep up viewers on a dwindling TV season? The director maintains always that what he saw was real, he just wasn't allowed to show it, and did his best to show us what happened. There's an interesting discussion to be had there, I think. Was he just showing how easy it is to fraud something, manipulate people into believing whatever they see? Who's to say if the true footage ever did come out, we would even believe it? We would probably just dismiss it the exact same way. But if you want to see way more scary footage, real or not, dismissible or provable, we have got loads and loads of that for you to enjoy. So click through, stay a while, and get scared all night long with Top 5 Scary. I'll be here the whole night and in this building. Number 4. Edgar Mitchell. The thing about most alien sightings is that they don't always come from the most reputable of sources. You know, it's usually a random internet post, maybe a blurry shot from an iPhone kind of thing, posted on Reddit with a caption like, "What is this?" Or, you know, it's somebody who was walking home late at night and saw some lights in the sky and didn't know it was a plane. And while I think we should respect the voice of the people and the common man, it'd be nice if we got someone with a little bit of clout to their name. Well, luckily we've got more than a few astronauts who've seen bizarre things up there and are willing to share their stories. Edgar Mitchell is one such man. He's stood on the face of the moon before. He helped save the Apollo 14 mission from becoming a disaster. He's the sixth man to ever walk on the moon, and he is a lifelong defender and believer in aliens and UFOs. Mitchell claims that he's seen things that prove existence of life outside the planet. First and foremost, he is a firm believer of the Roswell conspiracy, and he insists that all those stories are true and that the military has been hiding the truth behind what happened at Roswell for decades, adding on to say that it was buried, and the military propagated a covert movement to discredit everything that had happened at Roswell, to deter people from taking any news about UFOs and flying saucers seriously, dismissing it forever as tinfoil hat stuff. Mitchell claims that NASA believes the public wouldn't be able to handle the truth. Come on, we're ready. We're ready, we're all ready, we're big enough now to know the truth. It's like the tooth fairy, we're grown up, we know where the quarters are coming from, just tell us. And Edgar Mitchell's been trying to just tell us. In 2004, Edgar Mitchell told a Floridan newspaper that he knew there was a secret cabal inside the American government that took in and studied alien corpses, and that after JFK was removed from office, the group did not answer to the president and didn't include the commander-in-chief in their briefings. He was quoted saying, "They all know that UFOs are real. The question is where they are coming from. A shadowy organization existing outside the president's control with insider knowledge on aliens and trying to suppress the public." Did Mr. Mitchell just casually confirm the Men in Black are real? Now, NASA themselves obviously denied all of Mitchell's statements, but obviously they would. What government is going to throw their hands up and admit that they have been slicing up alien bodies on the side? Number 3, the first flying saucer. Now, while the Roswell, New Mexico incident was the UFO sighting that really shot alien sightings into the mainstream public consciousness and kind of defined what alien sightings look like, you know, the idea of little gray or green men and flying saucers, it was obviously far from the first alien sighting ever recorded, just kind of the most popular. But not even a few weeks earlier, there was actually another famous sighting, and one that's thought to be the progenitor for sightings of UFOs being thought of as flying saucers. Kenneth Arnold was an American aviator. Unlike most UFO sightings, Kenneth never changed his story once, never made any kind of surrealist, outrageous claims, and stuck to the same story for the rest of his life. He saw weird saucers in the air he couldn't explain. Well, let's take a listen. It was 1947, June the 24th, weeks before Roswell, which occurred in July 1947. Mr. Arnold was flying his private plane over Washington by Mount Rainier. I've never been to Washington, so you guys gotta forgive me. He was looking for a recently downed transport plane that had a $5,000 bounty the US military was offering in exchange for its finding. As he was approaching the summit, Arnold noticed that he saw 9 blinding flashes of light hovering up above. When looking in closer, they resembled ships but looked like discs. Arnold said that he saw them flying in a bizarre pattern, with each position diagonally together, reporting that it reminded him of the tail of a kite. Arnold was an aviation expert and said that the craft seemed far more advanced than anything human beings were capable of at the time, moving at unbelievable speeds. He landed at a nearby airport and told crew that he saw something bizarre he couldn't rationalize, worried that perhaps it could have been missiles being fired at Washington. Reporters interviewed him and he was pressed for several questions, but no one could corroborate or figure out just exactly what it was he had seen. Arnold was questioned by the Army as well, who took his claims remarkably seriously, as he was a fairly respected and reputable man, and there wasn't really the same culture surrounding aliens and UFOs, and as such, his claim was met with genuine worry. No one ever figured it out, but the story of them being saucers, combined with the saucers seen in New Mexico, led to the public perception of UFOs picturing them as saucers for the better part of 60 years, pretty much to this day. Number 2, the Travis Walton abduction. Now, abduction stories can sometimes be a little much to believe, even for those with the most open minds who want to believe. You know, they all seem kind of the same. It's somebody you maybe can't trust driving home late at night, saw something strange, they woke up in a blinding light room and they got poked and prodded by little gray men. Well, Travis Walton's story is not dissimilar to that. It's pretty out there even by abduction standards, but it's too juicy to pass up, so pop open those ears. In 1975, Travis Walton was working as a logger and was facing a fairly routine day, 6 other loggers and him driving around in the forest when they saw something incredibly bright shining at them through the treetops. One of the men claimed it looked like a flattened disc, a saucer of sorts even. Walton stepped out of the bed of the truck to investigate and was struck by some invisible force that knocked him backwards. The rest of the crew panicked and drove away. Huge faux pas, I'll say, leaving your coworker behind after being struck by an alien, but okay, you think you know somebody. When the crew returned, Walton had vanished. Walton awoke and had thought that he'd been taken to a hospital because he'd found himself in a blindingly bright room and could hear people moving around him. But it wasn't until he got a good look at his doctors that he knew something was amiss. 3 feet tall, with brown, quarter-sized pupils, with marshmallow-like skin. Walton freaked out, obviously, as one would probably do, and was swiftly restrained by his captors. He tried to fight them off, but was greeted by a tall creature he said resembled a humanoid, but was masked by an intimidating helmet, a kind of Darth Vader looking thing. The masked creature took Walton and escorted him back into the operating room and put a translucent mask over his face. And Walton drifted out of consciousness again, unsure if anything was real. The next thing he remembers is walking alongside a highway as if nothing had ever happened. He eventually finds his way to a phone and called his brother-in-law, who panically asked what had happened. It turned out that Walton had been gone for 5 days, and he was untraceable. Search parties had formed looking for him, sent dogs and choppers tracked him from the woods, but no one could find any sign of him, as if he'd blinked out of existence and then blinked right back. Travis swore what happened to him was real, a real abduction, and he's maintained that story ever since that fateful week in 1975. Now, if you think this story is fascinating and you're upset that nobody recorded any of it and there wasn't any footage of what Travis described, well, the tragic news is, yeah, it doesn't exist. You can, however, watch a 90s sci-fi movie that is directly based off Travis's case called Fire in the Sky. I've never seen it, but I'm sure it's on Amazon Prime or something. It's got Robert Patrick from Terminator 2. He's in it. He's a good actor. Yeah, check it out. And number 1, the Rendlesham Forest Incident. The incident and conspiracy at Roswell, New Mexico is one of the most famous events in UFO culture. This incident is considered England's Roswell, the Rendlesham Forest Incident. Few other alien sightings can boast this many government witnesses, memos, and strange proof. Let's paint the scene. It was December 26, 1980. Oh, nice and festive and Christmas themed. Surrounding Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England was a series of Air Force bases and US Army personnel. 2 of these stationed officers were John Burroughs and Jim Peniston. On this fateful night, the 2 of them were concerned by shining bright lights that were seen flying above the base, worrying that it could perhaps have been a threat or a spy plane scouting out their location. Burroughs said that he thought the lights looked like a beacon summoning people over, and over 40 people on the base all agreed, reporting seeing the lights and sharing their concerns. So the 2 men were sent over to Rendlesham Forest to investigate. In their official document, the 2 men claimed that they had seen a strange, shining, triangular object that was pulsing with colored lights. Neither of the men recognized it as an aircraft from any military across the globe. The craft had seemed far too advanced for anything of this world. Black and made out of a smooth, opaque glass. It didn't appear to have any wings or landing gear or even really any methods of propulsion or exhaust. The men describe it as covered in hieroglyphic-like symbols etched onto the hull of the vessel all over. Neither of the men could identify the glyphs as anything they'd seen before. Duh, it's alien stuff. As the craft touched down, nearby animals were being driven into a frenzy, and the airmen's equipment started malfunctioning, communications equipment cutting out. The 2 personnel could no longer call back to the base. Now, not even 2 days later, the Rendlesham UFO was spotted again. 2 days later, the same strange lights were seen hovering above the bases surrounding Rendlesham. This time, the crews came significantly more prepared, waiting and ready for the UFO to make contact. The patrol group had found depressions in the ground, and their Geiger counters started blowing up with noise. And the group had known that they'd come across where the UFO had been. And then, right on time, the patrol saw the same craft flying above overhead, disappearing into the night. Years passed, and we're still no closer to understanding just what occurred to those faithful sightings. And we may never know. Number 5, the Navy pilots. Since the release of the UAP documents, the new nomenclature, UFO fever has been in the air more than ever since Roswell. We've got open confirmation that the US government, the Pentagon, is researching actively the possibility of alien craft outright. That's the craziest thing that's ever happened in my life. In September 2019, Navy spokesperson Joe Gradisher confirmed that 3 recently released videos by the military contain evidence of unidentified aerial phenomenon. Like, that's it. This is the Navy, the government pointing to a video and going, yeah, that's an unidentified flying object that we don't know about. They're not saying it's a weather balloon. They're not saying it's stars. They're not outright saying it's an alien, but they're certainly implying it. The Navy agreed that they would confirm the sightings this time because pilots encounter bizarre sightings all the time, but are usually too concerned to report the sightings because of the stigma attached to previous theories about what may or may not be in those videos. Put gently, it means that the Navy felt like they had to comment on this thing so that pilots would feel comfortable admitting that maybe they're seeing UFOs without feeling like a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracist. The videos in question include reports from the STARS Academy of Arts and Sciences, released from 2017 to 2018. They feature long, oblong shaped objects captured with infrared that appear in the Earth's atmosphere before rapidly disappearing from view. Now, really interestingly here is these aren't the only pill-shaped cylindrical UFOs that have been spotted recently. There were 2 videos from 2015 that came out, and before that there was a Navy case involving these in 2004, and even on the rest of this list you'll see a cylindrical cigar-shaped UFO in a sighting from the 40s. So this sort of thing does happen a lot. Now, the purpose of the Navy investigating all this stuff, it's more focused on safety hazard and threats of national security, but hey, at the same time, they may not be willing to talk about it so brazenly, but they definitely are checking just a little bit to make sure they are aliens. But they definitely know more than they're letting on. This footage released only makes up a tiny fraction of what the US Navy and other service branches encounter. One pilot, Lieutenant Graves, claims that in his 10 years flying for the Navy, he thinks he's probably encountered, I don't know, thousands of UFOs in his time. Those are his words. Now, who is to say how many of those might just actually be unidentified flying objects, birds, scouts, drones, whatever, but who's to say how many of them really were alien craft from outside the planet? And my friends, if you're looking to educate yourself on the matter of extraterrestrials, UAPs, UFOs, well, you've got to know by now Top 5 Scary is the place to be. I see the viewer stats in the videos. You goblins love when we talk about aliens. Well, if you want to keep loving them, click on through. We've got more unexplained sightings in the sky than the CIA. And if you want them delivered hot and fresh, you can subscribe and get them before anybody else. Number 4. Childs Whitted Case. The Childs Whitted encounter is one of the most recognized UFO encounters in American history for how surprisingly credible it seems. It happened shortly after the Roswell Incident, when UFO fever was hot on everybody's minds in the States, and it was showing. The sighting occurred in the morning hours of one July 24th, 1948. The 2 pilots, one Clarence Childs and John Whitted, were flying approximately 5,000 feet above Montgomery, Alabama on a clear, normal night. Flight was going well, nothing too exciting, but at around 2:45 in the morning, Childs saw something peculiar. He noticed a dull red glowing light above and ahead of the aircraft, and it wasn't even remotely near Christmas, so it wasn't Rudolph leading the sleigh. He told Whitted that it must be a new type of army jet that was flying in front of them that neither of them had ever seen. They wanted to get a better look at it, and in a matter of seconds, well, they would, when the object flew past the right side of their plane and pulled up with a tremendous burst of flame protruding from its rear, and it zoomed upwards and onwards into the clouds. The 2 pilots described the object looking like a flying cigar with a cylindrical chassis and 2 decks and windows. Besides the 2 pilots, one passenger on the flight, one C.L. McKelvey, insisted that during his flight he saw a bright streak of red flashing lights by one of his windows. Now, Childs and Whitted were obviously pretty darn confused by whatever it was they'd saw. Didn't look like no plane they'd seen before, and the way it moved seemed technologically more advanced than anything the US Army was putting out in the late 40s. Now, the US Army proper would challenge this account, and their scientists insisted. They investigated the report and said that it was probably just a meteor the pilots and passengers had seen, which almost sounds like it might make sense until you stop and think about it for a second, because what meteor has windows and a glowing red light coming from it and propels itself forward and rapidly goes upward? Most meteors I've ever heard of go downwards. And Childs and Whitted both disagreed with this as well, saying they got a good long look at it and it wasn't a meteor. Whatever it truly was, though, might be lost to history, tragically. Number 3. The Gander, Newfoundland encounter. Our next story comes to us from Gander, Newfoundland, and it happened on February 10, 1951. A U.S. Naval Reserve lieutenant and pilot Graham Bethune was occupying the captain's seat of a plane flying near Newfoundland, Canada, when he spotted something unusual, massive, and rapidly approaching towards the plane. It resembled a disc. The co-pilot made a report of what he saw, and this is what he wrote. Take a listen. "I observed a glow of light below the horizon about 1,000 to 1,500 feet above the water. The pilot and I observed its course and motion for about 4 or 5 minutes before calling it to the attention of the other crew members. Suddenly, the object changed direction at an incredible speed and began to pulsate, changing its colors as well. Then, it somehow reversed its course and tripled its speed until at last it disappeared over the horizon." The report would go on to say that whatever this object was, it came within 5 miles of the aircraft, which was proven later by radar evidence. Now, when the plane had landed, landed, the entire crew was detained by intelligence officers and interrogated. At their destination, pilot and passengers were questioned again by naval intelligence and required to sign full disclosure documents. Now, take this next part with a grain of salt. Okay? Because I only found one source on this. But apparently a CIA scientist confidentially interviewed the pilot, and during their interrogation, he showed him a photo of a disc-like object that looked extremely similar to the one they had seen flying over the Atlantic. However, during the interviews, no Navy, Air Force, or CIA men would ever answer any questions related to extraterrestrials. No one would say the word alien, no one was saying UFO, nothing like that. They were trying very hard to downplay that. So what was it then? Because it sounds incredibly suspicious that the interviewers had a photo of something that looked similar to it and weren't saying the word alien at all. Number 2. November 1986 Japanese Airlines flight. Our next one comes to us from a pair of Japanese pilots. In November 1986, Japanese Airlines Flight 1628 was heading over Alaska. Captain Kenju Terauchi and a crew of 2 others were on a flight making routine cargo deliveries to France. Captain Terauchi saw something that caught his attention when he saw blinding lights flashing off at the left and the right of the plane. Now, initially he didn't think too much of it. He thought, hey, maybe these are just US fighter jets zipping around. As his plane furthered forward, he realized that the object was flying ahead of him was of the unidentified variety, a UFO, if you will. Terauchi said that it looked like 2 spaceships had stopped in front of their faces, shooting off lights. The inside cockpit shined brightly, and I felt warm in the face, he wrote. That almost sounds kind of pleasant, to be honest. Captain Terauchi described the objects as being cuboid-shaped spaceships with a jet propulsion system that had horizontal lines of circular exhausts clustered around a dark center. The captain had also reported that when the plane had flown by this object, ground communications were cut out and all radar was blocked. Well, that's kind of odd, isn't it? Pretty interesting. Well, if you thought that was weird, the FAA would agree with it. That's the Federal Aviation Administration, who investigated the report very closely, interrogating Terauchi for everything they could out of the incident. Now, during this questioning, his co-pilot and flight engineer, they said that they thought the object they saw was just strange lights, but they did agree that they really couldn't easily explain what it was they saw. In the end, the FAA ruled that what it was light refraction through ice crystals suspended in clouds. A bunch of science words. Sure. Number 1. Lieutenant Gorman. Our number 1 spot on this list is a humdinger of a tale. Now, most of us can only hope to maybe someday see a UFO in our lives, but I mean, maybe if you were like me and you watched Star Wars way too many times and you still ask the hairdressers to get your hair cut like Luke Skywalker, not like anybody I know. Maybe you dream of flying an X-Wing through the stars, dodging lasers, getting into a cool alien dogfight. It's a shame none of us can claim we've done that, except, you know, George Gorman of the North Dakota National Guard. I don't think anyone would expect there to be anything exciting happening in North Dakota, but one of the best UFO encounters in American history did. Let's take a little listen and learn about it. It was 1948, a year after the New Mexico Roswell Incident, while people were still hyper-focused on little gray men and flying saucers. Lieutenant Gorman was flying a fighter jet solo around the skies above Fargo when he saw what he thought was an aircraft around 500 feet below him. He radioed his tower, but the operator told him that there weren't any other planes to be around and that it was a suspicious vehicle. So Gorman told the tower back he was going to investigate the situation and flew in within 1,000 yards to try and positively ID the subject. Gorman said it looked to be about 6 to 8 inches, clear white and completely round without fuzz at the edges, and it was blinking on and off. As I approached, the light suddenly became steady and pulled into a sharp left bank. I thought it was making a pass at the tower. Gorman then said he thought the light charged at him. He didn't want to be the first pilot to crash into a UFO, so he readied himself to avoid it, but found the object suddenly shot straight upwards in the air, directly above him, and then disappearing into the clouds. Gorman tried his best to pull up to follow along, but his plane went into a stall while he was trailing it, and the entity had vanished. Back at the air tower, 2 traffic controllers reported they also saw a light flying above the airstrip they couldn't explain, and weren't present on any flight logs. Gorman was questioned about what he saw, and he said he was convinced that it wasn't just a light, that it moved too naturally, that it moved like it was reacting to his movements, as if it was playing a game with him. He said there was thought and precision behind all its maneuvers. We should ask it what it thought about all of that if Gorman was moving too naturally, reacting to all of that.